Welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks so much for joining us. Our first story has to do with the Texas Heartbeat Act. It was challenged in the Supreme Court yesterday. It's the nation's most restrictive abortion law, and it's already led to a sharp drop in abortions in the Lone Star State.
Opponents of the law claim that its unique enforcement mechanism is an end run around the courts. They also say it could be used to threaten free speech and other rights. So how did the justices respond? CBN's Caitlin Burke reports from the Supreme Court.
Monday, the High Court heard two challenges to SB 8. The first brought by lawyers representing abortion rights advocates. The second by the U.S. Justice Department. Both focused specifically on Texas lawmakers transferring enforcement of the law from state officials to private citizens.
Texas delegated enforcement to literally any person anywhere except its own state officials. The only conceivable reason for doing so was to evade federal court review.
Attorney Mark Herron, representing abortion providers, argued allowing the law to stand would provide a roadmap to nullify other constitutional rights. Newly appointed U.S. Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar called it an attack on the authority of the High Court.
States are free to ask this court to reconsider its constitutional precedents, but they are not free to place themselves above this court, nullify the court's decisions in their borders, and block the judicial review necessary to vindicate federal rights.
What exact relief are you requesting?
So we would be requesting an injunction against the commencement or the docketing of lawsuits against the clerks across the state of Texas, as well as injunctive relief against the state executive officials for their residual authority to enforce SB 8.
Texas Solicitor General Judd Stone said that would be pointless.
Petitioners' Article 3 inequitable problems begin with what they really want, an injunction against SB 8, the law itself. They can't receive that because federal courts don't issue injunctions against laws, but against officials enforcing laws. No Texas executive official enforces SB 8 either, and so no Texas executive official may be enjoined.
But Prelogar says an injunction against Texas itself would bind state judges.
It's unprecedented, and it is contrary to our system of federalism to enjoin a state judge even from hearing a case. When has that been done, and how can that be justified? The judge is a neutral arbiter.
I'm asking you, counsel, are you aware of any other example of such an injunction?
In the history of the United States, no state has done what Texas has done here.
Stone says the federal government cannot claim a sovereign interest in this case unless authorized by Congress. Justice Kavanaugh questioned the Texas solicitor on the implications of the law on other constitutional rights.
It could be free speech rights, it could be free exercise of religion rights, it could be Second Amendment rights. If this position is accepted here, the theory of the amicus brief is that it can be easily replicated in other states that disfavor other constitutional rights.
Stone says it's the job of Congress to step in to pass legislation protecting specific rights from being suppressed by this type of lawsuit. Meanwhile, Texas Governor Greg Abbott recently spoke with Focus on the Family about SB 8, saying the enforcement mechanism used has been used many times before.
It's called a qui tam lawsuit, where it provides third parties the enforcement power. It's used in Medicaid and Medicare claims. It's used in any type of False Claims Act against the federal government. And so it just imported into the enforcement mechanism a strategy that's been used for well over a century in the United States.
A ruling from the Supreme Court is expected by the end of the year. And just a reminder, while this case does not challenge Roe versus Wade, in December, the court hears a challenge to a Mississippi law that bans most abortions after 15 weeks. And lawyers on that case have explicitly asked the High Court to overturn Roe. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Well, if you follow all of that through, you're probably confused, because I am. You get into, this is a procedural case. This is not a constitutional case on Roe versus Wade. This is a procedural case. And can Texas law empower citizens to file suit? And if so, is that constitutional as a procedure? The other side of the constitutional question is, can the Supreme Court enjoin Texas state courts from hearing cases. That is a very new argument, but that's exactly what they're asking for. They're asking for an injunction so the law cannot be enforced, and the clerks of court in Texas can't even allow the case to be filed if it's brought under that law. It's a very technical case, but literally has nothing to do with Roe versus Wade other than the Texas law is empowering citizens to file suit against abortion providers. So that's the key thing, but the Supreme Court is not even hearing that side of it. They're only hearing the procedural side. So that's why you'll hear a lot in the news about this, and it's right now, it's got nothing to do with Roe versus Wade. At some point, it will, and probably the Mississippi case and the Mississippi law will come up before the Texas law comes up on that issue. Well, in other news, voters today go to the polls in Virginia, where the governor's race has captured national attention. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. The polls show a dead heat in the race between Democrat Terry McAuliffe and Republican Glenn Youngkin. If Youngkin pulls off the upset, many will point to education as the reason why. CBN senior national affairs correspondent Heather Sells reports on how schools became the hot-button issue and what it could mean for 2022.
The turning point in the Virginia race may well come down to 12 words from the final debate between Democrat Terry McAuliffe and Republican Glenn Youngkin.
I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
The explosive comment couldn't have been more timely. The next day, the National School Board Association, in effect, compared parents at school board meetings to domestic terrorists, asking for federal intervention. 5 days later, Attorney General Merrick Garland ordered the FBI to get involved. The Youngkin campaign took full advantage, running a series of Parents Matter ads, while McAuliffe doubled down.
So did you misspeak during that debate?
No. It's really an organic movement of parents across the political spectrum.
Radio host Eric Erickson says the demographics behind the new parent movements are telling, blending conservatives and liberals worried about their kids' education. Many believe it could push suburban voters who left the GOP in the 2020 presidential election to vote for Youngkin. Pastor Sam Rodriguez, a former Trump faith advisor, predicts it will drive Latino voters.
Any ideology that runs counter to grace, to the image of God, must be confronted. And we're seeing Latino parents in Virginia saying, hold on a second. We didn't sign up for this.
With midterm elections just around the corner, this race is seen as a bellwether. It will point to the viability of President Biden, who campaigned with McAuliffe, as well as the reach of former President Trump, who Youngkin has kept at a distance. The bigger impact could be the importance voters put on education.
I do think that the McAuliffe campaign in Virginia is going to be a test here. If he loses, it's going to be on this issue.
Such a loss could force the Biden administration to begin to walk back the FBI action and create a significant opportunity in 2022 for parents concerned about schools. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thank you, Heather, and you can watch our special election coverage tonight across our CBN News digital platforms beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you download our CBN News app or the CBN Family app. While President Biden attends the Global Summit on Climate Change in Scotland, here at home, Democrats are still wrangling over his domestic agenda, including the president's massive social spending plan. They had anticipated holding a vote this week, but a Senate holdout may have put the brakes on that, with a warning that the Democrats aren't being honest about how much the bill actually costs.
What I see are shell games, budget gimmicks that make the real cost of the so-called $1.75 trillion bill estimated to be almost twice that amount. This is a recipe for economic crisis.
West Virginia's Joe Manchin also called for an immediate vote on the $1.2 trillion infrastructure plan, saying it should not be held hostage to the social spending bill. Progressives appear to be abandoning their strategy of keeping the two pieces of legislation linked. Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal telling MSNBC that members will vote for the infrastructure bill. Well, looking to the African nation of Sudan, where new questions surround a recent military coup there. While the initial reaction labeled the move a setback for freedom, it may have more to do with stopping the Muslim Brotherhood than quashing democracy. Gary Lane brings us the CBN News exclusive report.
Appearing on CBN's The Global Lane, a former Army Special Forces operative disclosed what he found during a recent East Africa fact-finding trip. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Sarga Sangari says he discovered Muslim Brotherhood ties to Sudan's civilian transitional government. Sangari believes Sudan's military took action to prevent the Brotherhood from radicalizing Sudan, much like it did in Egypt during the Obama administration.
They were starting to feel that they were being squeezed to the same level under the current Biden administration, who has some of the same old advisors that were under Obama. And Jeff Feltman, who was a special envoy for the U.S., was there the day before the coup took place.
Do you think our officials even knew that the Muslim Brotherhood was active there?
I don't think they knew, to be honest, and I think they were caught off guard.
Media outlets like Reuters reported U.S. diplomats indicated Feltman warned Sudan's General Abdel Fattah el-Burhan to not seize power. Although the military followed through with the coup, el-Burhan indicates the intention to hold democratic elections scheduled for 2023. Nevertheless, Sangari says, like the Afghan withdrawal, the Biden administration is proceeding with what he describes as a feckless foreign policy in Sudan and throughout the region. Sangari believes the Israeli government understands the growing Muslim Brotherhood threat. That's why it's remained silent about the coup.
The transitional government was looking forward to being part of the Abraham Accord, and I think when you hear nothing really seriously coming out against this particular coup from the Israelis, it means that they probably understood what was happening on the ground, and U.S. had no clue.
So how should the United States respond at this point? Sangari says the United States must actively engage with Sudan and America's partners in the region.
You cannot support a coup, but at the same time, you have to understand why the coup took place. All we could do is ensure that we hold the current military powers in Sudan to their word that there will be elections in 2023 and help them and help the regional powers to finally get rid of the Muslim Brotherhood.
And prevent ISIS and other Islamic terror groups from operating out of the Horn of Africa. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thank you, Gary. Gordon, back to you.
Well, this is a disturbing development. If the Muslim Brotherhood is live and kicking in Sudan, it's because they've been encouraged along the way by people within our own State Department, within our own administration. Go back in time to the Cairo speech of President Obama. In that speech, the optics were incredible because our State Department, presumably under orders from the president, mandated the Muslim Brotherhood be put in a position in that auditorium, and not just any position, be granted seats on the front row. In that, he gave them recognition. What Egypt had been trying to push down, abolish, they jailed the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. They thought they were radical terrorists who were bent on destruction and didn't want to have any part of them. But because of that position within the Cairo speech, they were now granted some kind of protection, if you will, from the U.S. government. They were granted recognition at the very least. So in that, they were emboldened. So you have a destruction of a government in Egypt, the Arab Spring. And in that kind of turmoil, who rises to the top? Well, it's those who are the most organized. So the Muslim Brotherhood, clearly the most organized non-governmental group, political group within Egypt, and it shouldn't shock anyone. They won an election. It's much like it shouldn't shock anyone that Hamas won the election in Gaza, or that the Muslim Brotherhood is active in Gaza, or that the Muslim Brotherhood, it's now revealed, is active in Sudan. So as that government was changing, trying to become more democratic, suddenly a political party who's also a terrorist group organized and made sure they were part of the government, and it was all part of a plan to take over. These are incredible developments, but we have to look in the mirror. Why in the world would our State Department give any kind of recognition to an acknowledged terrorist group? This should never happen. Just as the Bush administration declaring free and open elections in Gaza led to the election of Hamas, under the Obama administration, free and open elections in Egypt led to the election of the Muslim Brotherhood, then led to a military coup. Now we're seeing the same thing play out in Sudan. At some point, our State Department has to wake up to the ideology behind these various groups and say, if you have that ideology, you have no business being in power.